You pointed to the research about likeability in men and likeability in women in leadership. But another aspect, I think, is the focus on appearance, you know, just the absolute forensics that get done about what women are wearing and how they look. You joked that your book about being Secretary of State should have been entitled The Scrunchy Chronicles, 112 Countries, and it's still all about the hair. I'm wondering whether What Happened should have been entitled Almost 66 Million Votes, and it's still all about the hair. Can you talk to us about how this question of appearance just drags at women leaders?
Well, you know, look, the double standard is alive and well, and it is more difficult for women in public positions. We'll talk about politics, but it's true in business, it's true in the media. It's just true across the board because there are expectations about women's appearance that are deep in our collective DNA, so that people feel free to comment either favorably or unfavorably about hairstyles, clothing fashions, and all the rest of it. Now, some of that is because we are still getting used to seeing women in these roles. When you are the only woman doing something, or you are the first woman doing something, there is no basis of comparison. And so the attention is, you know, really focused on the superficial, in part because people are trying to make sense of it. You know, in politics, men come in all sizes and shapes. All kinds of hairstyles or no hair at all. And it is not remarked upon because you are used to seeing men in these roles, and you are also, because that's who that's who you are expecting to see. You are also, you know, very used to seeing differences in how they present themselves. But we are still breaking through. We're breaking through glass ceilings of all kinds, and we spend a lot of time when you are in the public arena trying to figure it out for ourselves, trying to get to the point where you don't have to think about it, which is, you know, not yet achievable, but something to be sought after. And I did calculate, when you think about, let's say you spend as a woman an hour a day doing your hair and makeup. And I had a campaign of about 600 hours because it was 600 days. So you divide that and think of how many weeks you are spending doing your hair and makeup. I mean, it is exhausting. It is a time suck. And you know, you finish it, you do the best you can, and then, you know, somebody is always going to say, oh, can you believe she wore that? Or it's kind of funny. But it also is a serious way of undermining women's confidence and putting women on the defensive. If you remember, our current president, when he was running for the Republican nomination, insulted women's looks repeatedly, including the one woman on the stage who was vying for the Republican nomination. He didn't attack her successful business background or her views on issues. He attacked her face, and he attacked the women's faces of commentators and interviewers who were asking him things. Now, why did he do that, other than the fact that he is what he is? But why did he do that? Because it was a way of undermining the women he was insulting. And there is a big audience for that, I regret to tell you, that there is still a very large proportion of the population that is uneasy with women in positions of leadership. And so the easiest way to kind of avoid having to look at someone on her merits is to dismiss her on her looks.
And this unease, the fact we're not used to women leaders yet, it dismays me how it can start there, which in some ways is a relatively benign end, you know, that we're still getting used to it, but it can easily cascade into a really nasty end. You know, I, as Prime Minister, referred to as a witch. A commentator said that I should be put in a chaff bag and drowned at sea. I had to point out that you couldn't drown a witch, so they needed to work out exactly what they wanted to do. But it just dismayed me that, you know, for you, this ended up with chants of lock her up or string her up at Republican rallies. String her up. It's like the Salem witch trials again. You know, why do you think it gets there, as nasty as that?
Well, you know, I was talking about this question with a very well-known classics scholar, Professor Mary Beard from Cambridge University, and she has just written a short, punchy book about women in power, and she traces these attitudes and these insults about women back to our earliest recorded history and writing. She starts with you know, Homer and Virgil and the way women, both real women and mythological women, are treated, how they get their comeuppance. And she wrote a piece during the election about the horrible slogans and pictures that were being sold at the Republican convention. And, you know, just awful, awful things that were being talked about, which was one of the nicest things that was said. And she said that, you know, there is this fear, there is this anger, even rage about women seeking power, women exercising power, and people fall back on these attacks, like you're a witch, or you should go to prison, or whatever it is. And the enthusiasm with which that is generated speaks to a much deeper sense of alienation that people still have toward women leaders. And you know, it's not a majority, thank goodness, it's not, but it's a very vocal minority, at least in my country. And sometimes these tropes, these stereotypes, are very much a part of the press coverage. You mentioned how, I mean, people on your televisions talking about you. And you know, and in the book, in this chapter I have called On Women in Politics, I say, look, you know, people would all the time say, well, I'm not against women, you know, as they'd be, you know, wearing a T-shirt saying these horrible things. I'm just not for that woman. So, okay, fine. So the election happens. Forget that I got 3 million more votes. It's over. And we go on to, you know, whatever's going to be next. But as soon as other women with high profiles, women who might someday run for president, began speaking out, the same attacks started all over again. You will remember, some of you, Senator Elizabeth Warren on the floor of the United States Senate reading a letter from Coretta Scott King about Jeff Sessions. It was the session about Sessions. And so she was reading this letter, and the majority leader, Senator McConnell, told her to stop and warned her if she didn't stop, she would be ordered off the floor. I was in the Senate for 8 years. I never saw this happen. But there it was on live television, and, you know, Senator Warren is like, what is this about? And so she keeps reading the letter, and so McConnell said she was warned, nevertheless she persisted, and they took her off the floor. And immediately afterward, within minutes, a Democratic male senator came to the podium and with a great show of chivalry, gallantry, said he would read the letter that Elizabeth was interrupted from reading. And he read the letter and nobody said a word to him. Mitch McConnell did not go back and say, we are warning you too. So the other side, and at least in in our country, and I think yours, knows the power of misogyny, knows that at the very least you can plant doubts about a woman in people's heads. Why is she being thrown off the floor of the Senate? Why are they saying lock her up? So that those images, they remain, so that even your supporters might say something to you like, well, I didn't like all that lock her up stuff, but, we shouldn't let that happen. I'm for you. But they're thinking about it. And so the impact lingers. And so it's a strategy. Some people are just visceral about it, but the media people and the political strategists, they know exactly what they're doing.
I think that's right. Having had that election campaign, having won the 3 million more votes but not been elected president, I think all of us are admiring of the resilience you showed, given what you went through, and that you're now still speaking out on causes that you care deeply about. Can you explain to people what now? What next for Hillary Clinton?
Well, it's an ongoing discussion that I have with myself, because last year was devoted to the book. I just have to explain that it was something I had to do. And there were many people who advised me not to, and many people who criticized me for doing it, but it was just a passion that I had to come to grips with what happened. So that really consumed much of my year. But I continue to work to support candidates and causes that I care about. I have a whole menu of those. But my primary focus as a citizen, as somebody who's been in public life, is on these November elections that we will have in our country. Because the entire House of Representatives is up for election, and 1/3 of the Senate is up for election. And I think it's imperative that the Democrats take at least one of those houses back, preferably both, and begin to act as a check and balance on the White House. Because right now the Republican majority is cowed, intimidated, or actually approve of everything that's going on. And it's quite concerning to me, because unchecked power, whether you agree with how it's being used or not, should be avoided and prevented in a democracy. And I think it's imperative that we do everything we can to try to win those elections. So I'll be spending a lot of my time focused on that. But I'll continue. I'm working with some colleges and universities on various projects, both in the United States and in Europe. And I will also probably write some more and continue to speak out. But my real intense concern right now are the elections.
And as those elections roll round, do you think we're clearer now on the strategies that we need to have to deal with this weaponised fake news?
I think we are learning, but I don't think we yet know, especially in countries like ours that have free speech, have vigorous media environments in which people are speaking out, arguing, and with the phenomenon of online information being more influential than traditional media at this point. So we're coming to grips with it. Slowly, our technology companies admitted what they did not want to admit about the number of bots on their sites, the number of Russian produced ads and other sources of inaccurate information. I was telling Julia that there have been a series of studies, academic studies, since the election, trying to figure out why people voted the way they did, because it defied all the polls. Nobody was ready for it. And people relied on what they saw in the media, but even more so online. So if something popped up in a Facebook feed and looked like a news report, people were inclined to believe it. And if they were already targeted psychologically to be receptive to the information provided, they were influenceable. So on several fronts, one study that just came out asked, why people who had voted for Obama 1 or 2 times did not vote for me, did not vote, or might have voted for third party or even for Trump. And they found there were several factors. There were pieces of information that were delivered not consistently through what we call the mainstream media, but online, that were particularly influential. Like, for example, I was dying. I was always dying in this campaign. And there were all kinds of, presentations that looked like a real news desk, where it looked like, the man sitting, behind the desk was giving you the news. And they would say things like, there's new information coming out about Hillary Clinton's health. She, may have Parkinson's or some other chronic disease. And if that's delivered to you over and over again, you begin to believe it. A second one was that somehow I, along with Barack Obama, was providing ISIS with military weapons. Now, this was never really explained. It was just asserted. And there were even these phony stories saying that I was one of the founders of the Islamic State, which, go figure. I mean, how does anybody even think of this, let alone believe it? Or my personal favorite, that Pope Francis endorsed Donald Trump. And if you'd been a high user of the news, a high consumer of the news, you knew that wasn't true. But if you weren't, and it was being presented to you, and it was being presented like, in a really clever, professional-looking way. Oh, breaking news. Pope Francis has endorsed Donald Trump. Let us go to our correspondent in Rome. And you've got then somebody standing in front of the Vatican picture, looking like he's in Rome, and he's saying, unprecedented, the Pope has endorsed Donald Trump. I mean, this apparently influenced people. And they did not know or did not remember that Donald Trump had insulted the Pope when the Pope went to our border to talk about the importance of being compassionate to refugees and immigrants. So you cannot make this stuff up. And I tell you all of it, and I could literally keep you here all night because the stories are just so unbelievable. This is coming to a theater near you. They are not going to quit. And it doesn't have to be the Russians or, in your case, the Chinese. It now can be nearly anyone. And one of the problems that our democracy will have, because we do believe in freedom of speech and we want vigorous debate, is figuring out what is real and what is not, what is fact and what is fiction. And it will get harder if we're not smart enough to figure out how to prevent it, because technology is now developing video techniques to literally put words into the mouths of people. So think of the Pope Francis example. Some clever, diabolical, technical person would take words out of public remarks from Pope Francis and twist them completely around. So now when you've got this fake news purveyor and he goes, let's go to Rome, all of a sudden there's a picture of the Pope. And the Pope is talking. He is saying, I believe Donald Trump would be a good president. And he has said the words I believe, even probably Donald Trump at some point, and now they're coming out of his own mouth. So keeping our democracies going, I mean, we can fight among ourselves, and our politics in the United States has become so partisan, so mean-spirited that we fight about everything. But we better get united about these fundamental threats to information that citizens can use to make voting decisions and elected leaders can use to make policy decisions before it's too late.
Very wise words. Thank you.